Climate change. It's real, it's happening, and it's destructive. Now, in order to understand climate change, it boils down to two key concepts: pollution and energy. And as a chemical engineer, I could be in no better place to talk about those two concepts. So let's start with pollution. Now, it goes without saying that since the dawn of humanity, and especially the Industrial Revolution, we have been tremendously polluting our air, our soil, and even our beautiful water. And throughout that entire series of pollution, we had to deal with many pollutants such as lead, mercury, SO2, and we also had NOx emissions coming out of our cars, to name a few. But all these pollutants, we were able to deal with them and limit their emissions because of our ingenuity. Now, unfortunately, there's a new pollutant in town, and that one is CO2. And CO2, carbon dioxide, is so tricky because one, it's everywhere, it's en masse, and two, it's inert, it's not toxic. As I'm speaking to you right now, I'm actually expelling CO2. But the real danger with CO2 is that once it goes into our atmosphere, it tends to trap a lot of heat. This in turn warms our planet and creates what we call climate change. Now, in terms of CO2 emission, as you may all know, they mostly come from burning fossil fuels. And this brings me to my second topic, energy. Because where do we get most of our energy? From fossil fuels. There's the real problem. It's that most of our energy needs are met by burning fossil fuels. In turn, this accelerates climate change. But there are solutions. And the first is to get clean energy that does not rely on producing CO2 emissions. And we've already done some great work towards that. We have solar, there's wind, there's geothermal. There's also the possibility of using biofuels for many applications who need fuel. Now, the other solution is also, is there a way that we can mitigate the current amount of energy that we need? Can we make our processes more efficient? Can we reduce in certain areas? And the truth is that we can. We can reduce our energy where we don't need it. For example, many buildings in the summer have AC, and yet the people inside find it too cold. So there's a waste of energy right there. You can also shut off your lights when you're not using them. You can support a more local economy because then you need less energy to transport those goods. So there are plenty of ways that we can reduce our current energy intake. But truthfully, there are some that matter more than others. Indeed, some human activities consume more energy than others, and some are greatly inefficient and unreasonable in their current energy demands. But before I go into which human activities are the worst, I want you to get a glimpse from the media on this one.
Le transport est responsable d'environ la moitié des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Plusieurs Canadiens voudraient rouler dans une voiture verte, mais elles sont souvent hors de prix. Est-ce que c'est une bonne idée pour le gouvernement de subventionner ces véhicules-là?
C'est un mensonge. It's a lie. Transportation is not the biggest source of CO2 emissions here in Canada. It's animal agriculture. And why is animal agriculture so energy intensive? Well, the easiest way to understand this is to look at the food chain. Every time you take a step up in the food chain, there's a loss of energy. So for instance, for a cow to fully become an adult will probably take 10 times the amount of energy in grass that it will give out in food. So here we are spending 10 times the amount of energy to only get 1 times that amount. It's incredibly inefficient. For example, imagine if every Canadian decided that we would only eat wolf. We would only eat wolf meat. Now, not only do you have to grow the grass, you have to grow the grass, feed the deer, and then take that deer and feed it to the wolf. You could imagine that it would not be sustainable. So cut the middleman, eat the plants, and save the energy. Nonetheless, human transportation does take a lot of energy. And instead of being number one, as my friend in Quebec pointed out, it's number two. So it's not far off in terms of really damaging our climate by pumping out all that CO2. And again, if you think of transportation, how can we be more sustainable with it? Well, a car weighs 3,000 pounds and carries 125 pounds. My bicycle weighs 20 pounds and can do the same thing 80% of the time. So 80% of the time, I don't need to be lugging 3,000 pounds of metal in the form of my car. So again, when everybody is driving out in a car, yeah, it does produce a lot of CO2. I want to talk about a third way on how to lower your carbon footprint, and that's through composting. Composting is very important. Compost your food waste, compost your organic waste, essentially compost anything that was living or is organic. And the beauty about composting is that you put the carbon back into the soil. It's a closed carbon cycle. On the other hand, when you throw that to the dump, it either deteriorates to CO2 or methane.
And methane is a potent greenhouse gas, trapping 25 times more heat in our atmosphere than carbon dioxide.
So please, compost that apple and compost those banana peels. There you have it. Now you know how to reduce your carbon footprint significantly. But before I end this video, this is an election year and climate change is a serious issue. So let's take a look at what each party leader are doing towards it. What better way to start things off than with Elizabeth May, Green Party leader since 2006.
Real climate action. Beginning the day after the election, we have to get to work to prepare for the deadline negotiations that will take place in Paris. Canada needs to hit the ground on October 20th, starting with outreach to other countries, like-minded countries. We have to have a First Ministers' Conference to improve our own position when we go into the negotiations, and we have to have done a lot of groundwork. I want Canada to go to those negotiations not as a constructive partner. I want us to go to be the leader that actually brings the whole process to a real conclusion that's ambitious and more aggressive than anything that's currently being planned.
She's absolutely right. Canada needs to be and will be an international leader when it comes to the fight against climate change. Now, let's go to Justin Trudeau, who was giving this speech at the Petroleum Club of Calgary.
The simple fact is that in 2015, pretending that we have to choose between the economy and the environment is as harmful as it is wrong. From one project to the next, credibility has been compromised, and Canadians no longer feel that they can trust their federal government to protect their best interests.
He's also right. Canadians, without the help of Harper, have still done a great job to limit their emissions where they can and where they have control. Now, those are the only leaders I'll be showing today because both of them are true activists towards climate change and have true plans. I would rank them a 9 out of 10. Mr. Mulcair, however, endorses a cap-and-trade system, but that is not the most effective, and for that, I only give you a 7 out of 10. How about the Conservatives? Well, I give them a 1 out of 10. And let's finish with Mr. 1 out of 10. Mr. Harper himself has endorsed through and through our fastest growing source of CO2 emissions, and that's the oil sands. And then on the other hand, he has done everything possible to muzzle federal scientists who want to speak out against the reality of what climate change is doing to Canada. Supports the fastest source of CO2 emissions and muzzles scientists like me who are trying to speak out the truth to Canadians. That's our Prime Minister.